So welcome to week 2 of lab. This week we are going to talk about some topics that we've covered in lecture, especially rationality and the role of this assumption in economic models. First thing we're going to do is take the attendance quiz, so we know that you're here and you get your participation credit. You're going to go to Canvas, you're going to go to quizzes, and then you're going to click on Lab 2 attendance, and you're going to use the access code Rationality. So I'll let everyone take a minute to do that. Once you're done, type in the chat, done. Okay. It's done. What? And then once we're done with that, we're going to do a new experiment this week called the Ultimatum game, and it's going to lead to some discussion, including the Joel's et al. Paper that hopefully everyone has read. We're going to talk about the discussion questions for that, and then we're going to review a little bit about problem set 1, and then Tara is going to talk about study groups at the end. Okay, I think we have almost everybody. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, just to recap a little bit to motivate what's coming next. This week we've talked about rationality, which is this common assumption that we make in economic models. It helps us resolve our models, makes them easier to solve. We assume that individuals are trying to maximize some very clear objective, whether that's maximizing utility, maximizing net present value, maximizing profits. These are all things that individuals might be trying to achieve, and that's all they care about. We're assuming that they're trying to achieve this objective over a stable set of preferences, so it's, you know, which things they prefer over another are not changing over time, and that individuals are operating with a complete set of information. Any relevant information is available to them and they're able to account for it. So these are pretty strong assumptions. We can probably think of instances already where it might not hold. But what's useful to think about is why and when might real people in the real world deviate from these assumptions, and what kind of impact would that deviation have on the validity of our economic models? And then understanding that, how can we make our economic models better by accounting for a broader set of human behavior? So to do that, we're going to play this game called the Ultimatum game. And I'm going to walk us through the instructions for how it works. It gets into a little bit of detail, so everyone please pay attention while I'm walking through the instructions, and definitely let me know if you have any questions at any point. So Tara is going to split everybody into breakout rooms of 4 people. Once you're in your breakout room, order yourselves alphabetically by your first name. So if we had Boris, Cora, Darian, and Ari in a breakout room, person 1 would be Ari, person 2 would be Boris, person 3 would be Cora, and person 4 would be Darian. Alphabetical order by first name. There will be 2 rounds of this game in each breakout room. Each round will be the same, just the people will be switched around. So in the first round, person 1 is the proposer, person 2 is the receiver, and persons 3 and 4 are just observers. In the second round, person 3 is the proposer, person 4 is the receiver, and persons 1 and 2 are the observers. And now I'll explain what each of those roles means. In each round, the proposer is given 10 points of extra credit. Need to update this slide. This should say 10. The proposer is given 10 points of extra credit. Then the proposer offers the receiver some portion of the 10 points. It can be any value between 0 and 10. Presumably, the proposer wants to keep as much of the extra credit for themselves as possible. So you would think the proposer wants to offer something low. But he can offer anything. He or she can offer, or they can offer anything. If the receiver accepts the offer, the proposer and receiver share the extra credit consistent with the offer. So if the proposer offers 3, the proposer will get 7, and the receiver will get 3. So they'll share the extra credit if the receiver accepts the offer. If the receiver rejects the offer, neither person gets any extra credit. They both get 0 if the receiver doesn't like the offer. Presumably, the receiver will accept the offer if it's higher because the receiver themselves wants as much credit as possible. But you only get one chance to make the transaction. The proposer only gets one chance to offer a number, and the receiver only gets one chance to accept or reject. So this is not a negotiation. All the observers have to do is watch and make sure there's no funny business. After the end of each round, the receiver will go to a Google Sheet link that Tara is going to post in the chat, and the receiver will record 2 things. Did the transaction occur? Did you say yes or no? And how much did the proposer offer? And you're going to take note of your breakout room number and whether you were in round 1 or round 2, because that's how we're going to report the results. So I'm going to show you the Google Sheet quickly. Tara just posted it in the chat, so you can check it out yourselves. Share. So this is what the Google Sheet looks like. It's ordered by, here's the number of the breakout room that you're in, and then here's whether you were in round 1 or round 2. So if you're the receiver in room 1 and you participated in round 1, all you have to do is go to this sheet and you'll say 1 if you accepted the offer, and you'll say, you know, okay, I accepted an offer of 2. That's all you have to put in. Or you could put 0 if you didn't accept the offer. Okay. Was the code for Lab 2 attended set already? I was a little late onto the Zoom. Yeah, the code is Rationality. Okay. All right, stop share.
So right. Ready to go?
Yeah, so before we break out into the different groups, I want to give everybody 1 minute to write down what you think will happen. What do you think the proposers will offer, and what do you think the receivers will accept? So just take 1 minute to do that. And also, if anyone has any questions, let me know right now. Yes, and for the Google Sheet, you have to go to the A3 tab. Don't let the results from the other sections influence your approach. Every time we do this experiment, we're doing it a little bit differently. So trying to see what happens when we do it different ways. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to write down what they think will happen. Unless there are any other questions, Tara is going to break you out into your breakout rooms, and you'll have 4 minutes for both rounds. As soon as you're done, just come back in to the main room.
So Nathan, I'm going to say you will be the 5th person in your room. So you can either just watch what happens or stay in the main room and we'll play the game with you. Oh, it's so weird. I swore that I checked that it regenerates a new URL for each tab, but it didn't.
I think they got it. I haven't been using the links. I've just been using a version of it that I have up on my computer, so I haven't tested it. All right. I feel so bad for my dog on these mornings because I don't walk her or feed her until after all the labs are done. She doesn't seem to mind.
Is she around? Or do you have her in a different room?
She's around.
Yeah, that's the look of someone who doesn't mind. Perfectly happy on the couch.
Yeah, she loves sleeping in.
All right, sounds like I should call everyone back in.
Yeah, they have like 1 minute, 1 more minute technically, but yeah, yeah. So if you tell them they have 1 more minute, okay. Cannot minimize though. So for folks coming back in, did anybody have any problems in their room? Any technical difficulties or anything?
No.
Looks like we're pretty much.
Looks like we're just waiting for 2 more rooms to come rejoin us, and 1 more room to enter data.
Just let me know when everyone's back in.
Okay, rooms are closed.
Cool. Okay, thanks everybody. Hopefully you all were able to complete the experiment without any problems. Let me know if anyone had any technical difficulties. While we let Tara kind of double check the results, make sure everything worked out, I'd love to hear from both proposers and receivers. How did your experience compare to what you originally wrote down, what you thought would happen? What made you choose the offer that you made for the proposers? What made you choose to accept the offer or not for the receivers? And what emotions or thoughts did you have while you were making those choices? Is anyone willing to share?
So I accepted my offer I was proposed to because it was just a fair offer. It was a 50-50 split. And it was honestly, even if it was less, it would be better than getting nothing at all. So that's why
Sounds reasonable.
I was an offerer or a proposer, and I offered 5 because because it was an even split, and then like I didn't do any work and like I had no investment in like obtaining these extra credit points. So I was like, like I don't have anything, like it doesn't hurt me to give away half of them, so I didn't.
That's nice. Who else? Anyone who felt really differently?
I wonder whether any people making offers were tempted to lowball.
Yeah. Was anyone tempted to make a really low offer? Or one result that I saw, someone made a really high offer. I'm curious what was behind that? What was the thought process there?
I know for my predictions, I said that transactions are going to happen because people want any extra credit. I know because I was a receiver, I was gonna take whatever he had to offer because they had all the 10 extra credit points and anything is better than nothing. But I know if I was a proposer, I was close to, I was gonna lowball for sure. Because I figured anybody would take the extra credit or whatever I had to offer. So 2 different sides for sure. Yeah, whatever he would have offered me, I would have taken completely. Even if it was 1, 2, I would have agreed, like, yes. But yeah.
Totally. What about for a receiver, if someone had lowballed you, what would your reaction have been? So we have one person saying, I would have taken anything. Does anyone feel similarly or differently?
So personally, I said that if the person offered 4, 5, or more, I would have accepted. But if they offered anything less, I would have rejected just because I thought that was greedy. And so I was like, if they want more, and that's kind of greedy. So I was going to reject the offer if it was 4 or less, or no, 3 or less.
So you didn't like that they were going to, if they were to try to be greedy, you wanted to punish them?
Yeah, I guess.
You'd be punishing yourself too, right? Because then you don't get any extra credit either, but to you it would be worth it?
Yeah, well, probably not, but like there was nothing really to lose, I guess, since I wasn't really thinking of like the consequences, probably. Yeah.
That's okay. This is an experiment. We want to know kind of what were you feeling? What was the rationale for making different choices? Any other thoughts before we hear from Tara about what the results were?
I was a proposer and I offered 4 because I just figured I would take a slight upper hand, but not like a too like unfair upper hand.
What specifically made you not want to push farther than a 4? Was there anything you were worried about? Or you just thought that that would be fair enough?
I think just fair enough. Like, since I was lucky enough to be a proposer, I was like, oh, you might as well take advantage of it and just do 1 point extra, but not like disadvantage anyone else too bad.
Mm-hmm. Tara, do you want to walk us through the results?
Sure. So folks can see on this Google Sheet the summary of what happened. Everyone accepted, everyone had their offer accepted. So there's 100% acceptance rate. So we kind of talked about how all of the offers were in the 5-point range. There was 4s, there were some 6s, or there was 1 6, but it averaged out to 4.93. And yeah, the lowest offer that was accepted was 4. So yeah, pretty much what we discussed.
Very interesting. This was the first 6 we ever had out of all the previous lab sections. I'd love to hear from that group how that came about. But so to just think about kind of, so what happened here? If we all were perfectly rational, economic actors, and we thought both the proposer and the receiver were trying to maximize the amount of credit they have, then we might expect the proposer to offer the receiver some amount approaching 0. The proposer could offer the receiver, some infinitesimally small amount of credit to maximize the amount of credit that they keep. And the receiver should accept that offer if they're also maximizing their credit, as long as it's anything over 0, because even some infinitesimally small value is greater than 0. But in this experiment, we see both the proposers and the receivers departing substantially from this credit maximizing behavior. We heard from the proposers that they were willing to offer values much higher than 0. And some folks here, weren't so specific about why exactly they did that. There was some discussion about fairness. They thought it was, reasonable to have more of a split, closer to even split of the credit. Some folks said, they weren't really invested. They didn't earn the credit, so it wasn't too much of a sacrifice for them to share equally with the receiver. Okay, so Arthur says, I feel like if this was done further into the quarter, people would be a lot more desperate. So even if proposers lowballed, receivers wouldn't really care. Okay, so maybe this is a point that we don't have enough information yet to know how valuable this credit is to us. So our preferences aren't very well defined yet, or we just have we have too little information to make a profit maximizing choice, or a credit maximizing choice. Or at least a choice that would optimize across all of these different considerations. And then we also heard from the receivers who were saying, some people have said, well, I would have taken anything, similar to kind of what we were talking about here. Yes, that makes sense. Receivers should be willing to take anything because something is always better than nothing. But we also heard from some people saying they wouldn't have been willing to take something lower than a 4 or a 5 because they didn't think that would be fair. That would make the other person too greedy. I kind of put the word punishment in someone else's mouth because that's kind of the the inclination is to, even though neither of you would receive any credit, you gain some psychological utility from punishing a person for being too greedy or not being fair. And so this is actually a result we see a lot in the literature when people play this game. If they play it with $10 bills, over 60% of the time, receivers will accept an offer of $3 to $4, or 3 to 4 extra credit points. But over 90% of the time, receivers will reject offers of less than $1 or 1 extra credit point. That's this perception that, well, that's just not fair. That's not, even though it's better than nothing, it's such a gross injustice when you clearly have $10 and you could share more with me. So there's this kind of punishment aspect or kind of value of fairness in the transaction that people consistently appear to value when this game is played. So any other comments or questions about the experiment, or thoughts or reactions? And then we'll jump into the Joel's et al. Discussion. And this will bring us to, and just kind of adding a little bit more theory to this experiment as well. So can people just give me a show of hands, your little blue hands? How many people did the Joel's reading? Okay, great. Got a decent number of people. Okay, pretty good. So yeah, I'll definitely lean on the folks who did the reading to help out here. Definitely encourage folks to do the reading for lab, then we can have good discussion. So there were 3 discussion questions on the course schedule for this reading. The first one being that the paper stresses 3 main types of bounds on human behavior that represent departures from the standard rational choice assumptions. Can someone describe one of those bounds?
I can describe one. I think the first one I mentioned was bounded rationality, which it was kind of talking about how like humans' cognitive abilities are limited. Like we're not kind of like computers. Like we have limited computational skills, so we can't always make the most rational choice like in our minds.
Totally. There's only so much information our brain can process at one time, so we'll use these mental shortcuts, which inevitably means kind of losing some information in our decision making, and that might bias us away from the perfectly rational choice that we could have made. Can someone describe another bound?
The second, sorry, you can go.
Okay, I can describe bounded willpower. I think about it kind of as like humans we're not able to always think about the long term and make actions right now in the present that will help us in the long term. So like with saving money, we often forget about the importance of saving money right now because we want to use money. So yeah.
Totally. Probably everyone's had the experience of not wanting to go to the gym. It's really tough to motivate yourself when you just want to watch one more episode of Bridgerton or whatever. Yeah, it's hard to optimize our behavior perfectly at every point in time to achieve the perfect, outcome or perfect amount of utility over the long run. Because in the short term, it's easier to do things that give you immediate satisfaction. Okay, what about the third bound? Can someone explain that?
The third bound is bounded self-interest. So in some cases, people will be more on the selfless side and care about like others and fairness instead of just about what their needs and wants are.
Exactly. Yeah, so we definitely saw that bounded self-interest come into play in the experiment that we did, for sure. You kind of care what happens to the other person in addition to, you know, just trying to maximize what happens to you. And that can come in both positive ways. You can, you know, reward people for being fairness, or you want the outcome to be fair for the other person, but also if the other person is trying to achieve an unfair outcome, like lowballing you, then you might want revenge on them. There's some utility you get out of that, you know, something bad happening to them, which is also a form of bounded self-interest. Okay, for the next question, what are the implications of non-rational behavior? Does it mean we have to throw out the tools of traditional economic analysis? What do you guys think? There's no right answer to this question. Do you think that this means we need to totally rethink, you know, the foundations of economics, or is there something we can salvage here?
I was thinking that you shouldn't throw out the traditional tools of economic analysis because I think they lay a good foundation to predict rational behavior, but maybe don't follow them super strictly because people tend to deviate.
So we need some flexibility.
I think we could keep the traditional economic tools, but I think maybe expand them to include human behavior or like other circumstances that are not currently included.
Totally. That's one option. Does anyone feel differently? Does anyone feel more pessimistic? Or is everyone here a staunch economist?
I think it's something that you always have to keep in mind about irrational behavior, because I think so often people like look at these economic models that like make sense rationally, but then when we apply them to like actual society and their implementation, irrational behavior comes into play and they don't work out. Like if there wasn't any irrational behavior, like all of our markets would be at like 100% efficiency and there would be like better wealth distribution. I think if we look at the real world, we see that that's not the case at all. So you can kind of use these pre-existing economic models as a jumping off point, but if you really want to apply anything to real life, you can't just use those like traditional models.
What else might you use, do you think?
I think data from like a larger scale, but like the experiments we're doing in class where you're able to get a feeling for irrational behavior. I think you said, 90% of people reject the offer if it's less than one. And so if you have data like that on a much larger scale to look at, I think that would be a lot more useful in the study of economics.
So you want empirical validation, you want the real data. Stephanie had a good question in the chat. What is tools of traditional economic analysis? Yeah, so, when I think of traditional economic tools, there's kind of the classical economic models. So like last week, our economic model was constructing supply and demand curves out of our observations of who the sellers and buyers were and what their different price points were, what their buyer value and seller costs are. And then using that information, we create a prediction of where will this market operate? What will the price be? What will the quantity sold and bought be? Because our economic model suggests that markets will operate at the competitive equilibrium where supply equals demand. So that's kind of an example of a traditional economic model, this kind of supply demand model. Another one would be, we predict that, you know, for this experiment today, we predict that individuals will want to maximize the amount of credit they receive, or maximize the amount of credit they have by the end of the round. And we saw that prediction was not very good. That prediction that people are individual, rational maximizers of the thing that they value. We didn't really see that happening in today's experiment. So maybe that particular model was not so good in this setting. And so I think a lot of folks brought up some of these issues. Some models are better than others. Maybe last week's model, the supply demand model, was a little bit better at predicting how our experimental markets worked than this week's economic model of individual credit maximization. There's different views in the literature on whether these kinds of flaws in the predictions of economic models are make it really hard to assume rational choice in different settings. It might be especially difficult for environmental policy because we don't have very clear markets for environmental goods and services. So that makes it hard to observe, are people's choices with regard to these goods and services rational? But there's also, arguments in economics that we shouldn't completely ignore the model of rational choice, because there's a lot of places where it should hold and where it probably does hold. And as many folks mentioned today, there's ways we can adjust our models, hopefully, to account for some of the largest behavioral issues that impact our results. So like for today's experiment, if we have a model trying to predict what people will do, we'll want to account for this question of fairness, which clearly is influencing a lot of behavior. Can we say these models are based on many assumptions? They aren't realistic enough. Yeah, most models are based on a number of different assumptions. So that kind of comes to this point here, is that you really want to track all the assumptions that go into solving your model. And it's really important to be clear which assumptions are most important, have the largest influence on the results of your model, and which one of those assumptions are least likely to reflect reality, which ones are kind of farthest from what we think reality truly is. And those two pieces of information can really help us think about how robust do we think this model is? Do we really believe the results? Okay, so one last question from Jules. What do you think? Do these findings in behavioral economics, like the kinds of results we saw today from our experiment, suggest that behavior is random and impossible to predict? What do you guys think?
I don't think it's impossible to predict. I think there are like trends that you can track, as we've seen, like different different variations of bounded willpower and rationality. I think you can find different trends within behavior. So I don't think it's necessarily impossible to predict.
I think I'll add on to Alma's statement, and I'll just say that behavior is very circumstantial. And within each scenario, you can probably find a certain very predictable behavior within each individual or population. So you could probably base your analyses on that to make a more sort of precise prediction or analysis.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? I think we still have a couple hands up. I don't know if that means people want to weigh in or that's just left over. Yeah, I agree with those two statements. In the reading, they kind of suggest that their thought is no, even non-rational behavior is not random. Even if it doesn't follow these specific assumptions, we still might be able to find ways to predict what people will do. And I think we saw in our experiment today that even though everyone departed pretty severely from the rational expectation, everyone still kind of clustered around a similar result. And that suggests that, going forward, we might be able to make better predictions about what people will do in this situation, because behavior is pretty consistent, even though it's different from the rational outcomes. And so we may need to make changes to our, perfectly rational assumption to account for the behavior that we actually observe. Okay, any other questions or comments about the experiment or the reading before we jump into problem set 1? Okay. So we're just going to focus on the first problem in problem set 1. Hopefully that'll get you going. Has anyone already done problem set 1? It's no problem if you haven't. I don't see any hands.
Do you mean completed it?
Well, yeah. Has anyone started on it? Okay, started it. Okay. Yeah, I'm mostly curious if anyone's done the first problem. So for the first problem, we're going to use the data from last week's experiment where we were all buyers and sellers, and we had different buyer values and seller costs, and we were all interacting in our marketplace. For the first problem in problem set 1, you're going to have to create demand and supply curves from that data to make a prediction about the market price and the market quantity transacted. Okay, a lot of people started it. Good. So it's due on Friday. Is that right, Tara? So definitely good that people have started. For anyone who has started problem set 1, so first of all, this data is fake, so don't pay attention to these actual numbers, but we'll walk through a little bit kind of how we use these numbers. Can someone tell me how they constructed either their supply or demand curve from this data?
I can try it. So I looked at for the demand curve, I looked at the highest buyer value and started there. And so at higher than $11, nobody wanted to buy anything. So I put a vertical line going from 11 up because no one wanted to buy it. And then at $11, I put a horizontal line going out to x equals 1. And then went down vertically to $10 from there. And then moved 3 units to the right because 3 people would buy at $10. Is that correct?
Yep, exactly. And then you'll just keep going from there. So then you jump down to 8 is the next place where buyers have a different buyer value. At 8, you get 2 more. Then you jump down to 6 and you get 2 more. Then you jump down to 5 and you get 3. 1, 2, 3. And then you jump down to 4 and you get 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you jump down to 2 and you get 2. And it all should add up to 18. You should get out to 18 because that's the quantity if you add up all these numbers. And so when you connect these dots, you get your demand curve. So perfect. Thank you, Megan, for walking us through that. And with your supply curve, you're going to use your seller data now, but you're going to start from the bottom because each seller is only going to be willing to sell if their price is higher than their seller cost. So you start with seller cost of 1, and anything less than 1, you get 0. But if you're at 1, you have 2 sellers willing to sell, so you go over to 2. Then you jump up to 2, you get another 2. You jump up to 4, and you get 3. Jump up to 5, and you get 2. Come on, man. 2. Jump up to 7, and you get 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jump up to 8, and you get 4. So here's our supply curve. So based on this information, where will our competitive equilibrium be? Where's our competitive equilibrium price and where's our competitive equilibrium quantity?
At $5.09.
Yeah. So it's a little, I didn't draw it perfectly, but right, our supply and demand curves intersect at where the price is 5. And then the quantity is a little bit confusing because there's this whole region of quantity where the supply and demand curves overlap. So it's anything between 8 and 9. But what you're going to see in the instructions for question 2 is that we're going to assume that anyone who is indifferent between participating in a transaction or not, so anyone who has 0 profits will make a transaction. We're just going to assume that. So that means any of these people where the buyer value is 5 and the seller cost is 5, they're going to sell. So we're going to take that maximum of this region, which is 9. It's a little messy, but it's supposed to be 9. So that's how you're going to find your competitive equilibrium and make your supply and demand curves for this problem set. You're going to want to make sure to do it pretty neatly because you're also going to have to calculate the area under these curves to calculate profits. And so you'll have to use a little bit of geometry to find those areas and calculate your profits. All right, anyone have any questions about problem set 1 before Tara talks about study groups?
I had a problem about what you just talked about buyer profit and seller profit. So to calculate buyer and seller profit from the supply and demand curve, is it we calculate the shaded areas that you just shaded?
Yeah, pretty much. So tell me the definition of profit in this setting.
It's the amount of money that a buyer or seller makes off of a transaction.
Yeah, and so
based
how do
on
we?
their seller cost and buyer value.
Right. So for any seller, it's going to be the difference between the price and their seller cost times the amount of quantity that they sold. So it's going to be this difference times this difference. So for these two sellers down here, if the equilibrium price is here, their seller costs are down here, so they make this amount of profit sold over this amount of quantity. So for those sellers, their profit is here. Once you jump up here, the price is up here. For these guys, it's their seller cost is down here. So it's this times that. That's their total profit, and so on. So you're finding the area of each one of those squares and adding those together.
Okay.
And you're going to do the same thing for the buyers.
Thank you.
And we'll stick around for a few minutes after class, and I have my office hours today. Emily has hers tomorrow. So if you have more questions about this, for study groups, I'm going to open back up the breakout rooms that you had before, so that you guys can exchange contact information with each other. We're not like requiring that you use these study groups in any particular way. It's just kind of an opportunity for you to have some, you know, one-on-one or more contact with other people in the class, in addition to whatever other mechanisms you use to study and collaborate. So yeah, let us know if you have any issues. Otherwise, I'm just going to open up these rooms again. See you guys next week.
Bye, guys.